welcome you both to the program. I'm so glad to have you here.
Blessing to be here.
Let me start with the basics, you two. Thank you so much. You've been revisiting old masters. I know because we did a panel together about Tom Paine. You're doing another panel with Gail Dines and Chris Hedges. Cornel can't make it, but you're talking about Marx. Why? Why are you visiting these folks? Professor Wolff, Rick?
I think the biggest plug for it now is that global capitalism is in terrible shape. It imploded on itself in 2008, and it hasn't emerged from this crisis, not even by a little. All the talk about recovery notwithstanding, the mass of people are in very bad shape economically. The gap between most people on the one hand and a tiny number of very wealthy people on the other is becoming a kind of daily obscenity in everyone's face. And so people are naturally asking, is this the best we can do? And discovering that there's a whole tradition out there called Marxian theory, which says, no, we can do better, and that we have to question a system that works this way, and so they rediscover Marx.
But Marx was a German writing about industrialism in 19th century Northern Europe. Is that relevant to people here in the States in the 21st century, especially African American people?
I think it's very relevant. Karl Marx was one of the great prophetic figures of the 19th century because he had an analysis of capitalism that kept track of the precious humanity of working people and poor people. No one can deny under global capitalism that there's been an escalation of oligarchs, of plutocrats. No one can deny that big banks and big corporations do not dominate government. No one can deny that working people are not benefiting to the degree to which hedge fund folk are, Wall Street people are, so that wealth inequality and all that goes with it has to be, one has to come to terms with it. So in that sense, Marxist analysis is probably the most indispensable form of analysis to make sense of a highly financialized monopoly capitalism in our day.
What did he write about the U.S.? Did he write much?
Oh yeah, he made his living, such as it was, working as a reporter for a newspaper here in the United States for many of his years. It was through that he covered the Civil War in the United States and the whole interest of slavery. That was very important. He wrote voluminously about all of that. No, this was a man who basically understood that the promise of capitalism, which he always likened to the French Revolution. Laura, you put it very nicely at the beginning. The slogans of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, brotherhood, these were the promise of a capitalism that would replace feudalism and bring us finally a society that was free and equal and had all those qualities. And by the time he's a young man, he realizes that was a false promise. Capitalism had indeed replaced feudalism, but it wasn't bringing us liberty, equality, and fraternity. And then he made that great breakthrough, and he taught us capitalism is not the agent for liberty, equality, fraternity. It's the biggest obstacle we face to arrive at that. And that was the impetus for the work that he then did to analyze how and why capitalism operated as such an obstacle.
Well, but how does that work out? In this country, we're given the idea that communism, socialism is about control, capitalism, it's about freedom. And freedom resonated with centuries of people in this country, at least too.
Well, I think, freedom, like everything else, like beauty and so on, lies a little bit in the eye of the beholder. Freedom to do what? Marx was very clever. I said, yes, you can free a person from slavery, but what freedom is that if the next thing they are is enslaved to another system that treats them very similarly? Marx loved to use the phrase wage slave because he wanted to teach working people that when you move from slave or peasant status and you're now a wage earner, that may turn out to be another kind of slavery, leading you to have to recognize that the further break has to be made, and then Marx tells us how and why that's the case.
But that's a tricky sell in the U.S., or at least it must have been in Marx's time, Cornel, because freedom from slavery was a big plus, and to be a wage slave rather than someone getting paid nothing at all was certainly a positive.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. I think Marx was also preoccupied with what's missing in the slogans of the French Revolution, which is democracy. See, Marx is part of a radical democratic tradition that says that the voices of those in institutions must shape the direction of those institutions. So wage slavery is another form of undemocratic governance to the degree to which workers' voices, and of course Brother Wolff talks about this with unbelievable eloquence and insight in his recent works, that the voices of workers are not heard. And so America talks about its love of democracy, but when it comes to the workplace, our workplace looks very crypto-feudalistic in terms of those at the top dictating and shaping the destiny of those units. But I mean, Brother Wolff lays this out.
You want to come in on that?
Sure. I mean, Cornel says it very nicely and summarizes it. When you go to work in the morning in a capitalist system, you're walking into a place where what you do, how you do it, what's done with the fruits of your brain and your muscle are all handled by a tiny group of people over whom you exercise no power at all. They can fire you and do when they think it's in their interest to do so. This is the opposite of democracy. In a democratic workplace, you would say every person, every man and woman who is part of this participates in making the decisions since they all have to live with the results. That's the democratic idea. And the modern capitalist enterprise is the negation of democracy. That's why it's always been so bizarre to imagine a system so fundamentally undemocratic in its workplaces should present itself as the agent or the bringer of democracy around the world.